On today's episode, we discuss the start of the investigation with the focus on the knife sheath left at the crime scene. We begin our debate on the DNA in this episode, but are planning a more in-depth discussion on a separate episode, so make sure to be looking for that. These chapters also cover the lives of Kaylee and Maddie right before and getting to the U of I, and their neighbor Matt. As always, everything we discuss is for entertainment and is speculation. Please like and subscribe, and definitely join our discussion in the comments. Welcome back to Typically Unique. I'm Kim Aponte, and I'm here with my husband, Carlos.
Hello. On part 3
Yes.
of J. Reuben Appelman's book, While Idaho Slept, for chapters, I believe, 10 through 15. Last episode, we left off with, I think, chapter 9.
Yes, and we showed it, and then we had discussion, but not really about the press conference itself. We kind of talked about it leading up to it, and there were some things in that press conference that need pointed out. He describes it as the blundering press conference, and he said that the press called it that. There's some reasons. So one thing that really doesn't sit well with me is that you're leading this horrible investigation. It's 4 days later, and you couldn't pronounce the victims' names right. And he didn't say Ethan's last name correctly. He didn't say Kaylee's last name correctly. And I just think maybe he wasn't the one that spoke to the families, but I don't know. 4 days, you should know the victims' names.
Yeah. And I think there were some other things in the press conference, too, about everybody's okay. It was kind of a targeted attack, some of that stuff that really didn't sit well with folks, especially what we know today, knowing that we don't know if it was a targeted attack. We don't know if it was somebody stalking this particular person. It could have been a serial killer out to just hurt college students. And, they're telling everybody, hey, it's okay. Don't worry. So I think there was a lot of things, hindsight's always 20/20. I guess if you put themselves back in that situation, it would be a totally different press conference. But at the time, because this went pretty national pretty fast, I think they were forward to get out there and do something, or at least say something. And yeah, it's a shame that they just couldn't have all got together and checked each other before they started, spewing things.
I know, but usually they come out right away and at least say something, and they didn't for 4 days. The second part of the clip that we inserted was the questions that Fry got from the press. It was really interesting for me to go back and watch that again, because they were just like the rest of us. When they found out, they were like, wait, there were 2 people in the house while this happened? And there were a lot of questions about that. Some information, but not a lot in ways of that. And he would not say who called 911. And to this day, they have not said who the 911 caller is. This author named the person, said it was that Hunter Johnson. I would like to know where he got that from.
It was not the roommate or that someone else had called. I don't know if they named him.
So they were asking about Stidge, if they were there during all this time. We're going through the press's mind that everyone on social media was asking, and they also seemed floored about the 8 hours.
Right.
Why did it take so long? Answer, he just said that we wish it wasn't that way, but that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And then one of the other big points that they asked about were the wounds, and if they believed it was one weapon. About that a little bit more. Get into some more of the evidence and investigation during this part.
Well, because in the book, starting at chapter 10, right, he kind of runs through the crime. It's about, some of the evidence, the PCA. It's almost like he's, I don't know, dictating from the PCA.
A lot from this chapter was from the PCA, just how they wrote it up, that they believed the events happened. But he starts off the chapter with like, they had, the best evidence of all was that K-bar knife sheath that was left behind. So they were just all gung-ho about that and immediately sent it in for DNA testing. So in the chapter, that's like the first thing. Okay, so that's sent off for testing. So now we're waiting waiting for that. And in the meantime, they start putting in search warrants. Okay, so if this was the weapon, let's put in search warrants to see who in this area has been buying K-bar knives for the past so many months. I don't know what the time frame was on it. They were looking for eBay. They got warrants for eBay, Amazon, all the places, stores that would sell that.
That's an interesting point now that I look back on it. Say there wasn't, what would they have done to try to narrow with the little bit of evidence that they had, right? I think they had 2 pieces of evidence. If they didn't have DNA, what would they do with those 2 pieces of evidence? How would you try to narrow the search? One is the footprint, right? So you would say, you would try to figure that out and how big that shoe was and yada, yada, yada. And that would be one way. And the other way would be K-bar knife, or who's in possession of a K-bar knife. And that's just like the Elantra. Elantra's date range are in that area, and it could be 10,000. So, if they believe the person came from the Elantra, you take those 10,000 people. How many have a shoe size of 12? I'm just guessing. I don't know. And then how those people who had a white Elantra and had a shoe size of 12, how many have purchased it, right? I mean, so there are some back ways to kind of find out who did this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's Kohberger. It just means that, hey, we have 3 pieces of evidence that we feel pretty confident in. Let's go with that and work our way back and see who fits those 3 things.
Another thing that they could have done was do the DNA testing on the 3 other items that they know had DNA on. Well, let me clarify then. They could have done the as intense testing as they did on the K-bar knife sheet or samples. So and we just found this out recently that there were 3 other samples of DNA. So just because in your scenario, if there wasn't any on the knife sheath, there were other samples in the house. So blood on the railing, glove. I think there are 2 gloves.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear from my side. I get that. There's 4 samples out there. I'm taking away the DNA. So I'm taking the DNA away from all things. So I'm not taking it away so you can push forward your suspect. I'm taking it away from all. And so they did run DNA on all of those samples. They only did or successfully completed the IgG with the sheath. Don't know if they attempted with the other ones to complete an IgG. So that's the other point, right? Yes. Do the IgG. But what I'm talking about is let's strip away the DNA. You have 3 pieces of evidence that looks pretty solid. Right.
So at this point, they're talking about the car. So they're going through all the evidence.
Right.
They have this white car that's in the neighborhood. Right. I want to go back to the latent shoe print because I had questions about that too. Latent means processing the crime scene. You would think there would be other shoe prints in substances that are visible to the eye. The way that it was described, the way the crime scene was described by the coroner, bloodbath, bloody, horrific, it would be everywhere. We even have photos of it seeping outside the house. I would just think there would be shoe prints of better quality or more telling, but I don't know. I'm not an investigator. So then after they've done all that, then they go back, they go through a second round and they're using like the amino black or whatever they use. And that's how they find that. So I don't know. To me, that's like we talked about, you like to point out a lot, how long would DNA on other surfaces or other places in the house, how long would it have been there? Like you wouldn't look at DNA in the kitchen that's far away from the actual scene because not really, if you have to dwindle it down, it's not relevant. And I'm thinking, well, an old shoe print on the floor really isn't either. But apparently they made a big deal about it.
Well, it's all relative, right? You know, and I'm not discounting any words that you just said, but if there's a latent shoe print, you started to ask me about what latent meant. Not that I know the answer, but it seemed like you're going in that direction.
No, I know that it means that you can't see it with the naked eye. You have to use chemicals to process it and pick it up off of the floor.
I think my point in all that was there is a shoe print in maybe some blood. There's a shoe print that is fresh.
Right.
So I think that's where I don't know how long on your hand when you leave a fingerprint, you know, how long that lasts. So to your point, right? How soon do you have to gather some of this evidence before it degrades enough that it's no longer viable for testing?
And I haven't seen that they had other shoe prints, so maybe they do. They say they have a lot.
But if
we don't know about.
But if there's just shoe prints on a floor, that's one thing. If there's shoe prints in blood that didn't exist prior to that night, then that's an important piece of evidence.
Yes, and in my mind, I would think that would exist.
Yeah. So we don't know what the shoe print is on or what, you know, what was left behind, what made the imprint. If I walked on a carpet, what's going to make the imprint?
The latent one that you're talking about, they know it had a diamond pattern, and I don't know if it's just the community that said it's a van, but it's definitely a pattern that would match a van tennis shoe.
Right. So
but we don't know what size for sure. I don't think.
What did it make a print of? Was it dirt? Was it dust? What did it make a blood? Was it Jello? Was it milkshakes? Like it had to make a print of something.
Yeah, if they're using that amino black, maybe it's blood. Yeah, true. And it was right outside Dylan's door. I thought it was facing, I think it's facing leaving the house.
Which makes sense.
So, I guess. Chapter was all about what are they going to start asking for evidence, right? All the warrants. So of course they're doing all the social media from all the victims, the cell phones, Tinder. And at first they only had Kaylee for Tinder, but then I guess they also did Maddie, because I think the other ones are, have boyfriends. The DoorDash delivery driver. Oh, they put out a warrant for all DoorDash deliveries within the past so many months. And that was because they cleared the DoorDash driver. And to this day, we don't know who that is. A lot of people suspect that it is somebody that was involved in the selling of drugs in that house or around that house, that has been in that house a lot, but no one's ever been able to verify that. There was a person that has a YouTube channel that went to the restaurant and asked, and they said it was a female with long dark hair. So take that for what it is. They did ask, but they were cleared supposedly on that day, the 13th. In the book, the author said the DoorDash driver was cleared on the 13th. So then they thought, well, maybe there's other drivers that could be familiar with the house. So that's why they put out a warrant for other deliveries, just looking for names, which, I guess that's smart if you're trying every angle. About the camera next to the house that picked up the dog barking, the whimper and the thud.
I thought I heard the author say, because it's been a little bit since I've listened to the book, but I thought I heard the author say cameras kept picking up the dog barking periodically, that it wasn't just the one event. So I would like to, maybe that's homework for me, because you always have homework. Maybe that's homework for me to go back to that chapter and listen to say, did the author say that? Because I know it's such a big thing now, because there's a recent was room and constantly barking And that went against what the PCA said. And, so let's release Brian Kohberger or something. I don't know. I thought I heard the author say that. So I kind of want to go back and.
I think I know where you're getting that from because I just listened to this again today. So, because I was thinking the same thing, that he was implying something like that. So the camera picked it up at 4:17.
Yeah.
But but in the PCA, DM says I was awoken by the dog barking at 4 a.m. Right?
Yeah.
So I just thought the camera, I don't know what had to set the camera off the camera's not running. When you have a video camera, it's not running constantly, and it'll probably only run for a couple minutes.
Right.
Every clip. So like you're saying, so that's what made me think that.
Well, and a lot of those we are Ring camera owners. So let me ask you, because this is, you mess with it a lot. Is it only movement that,
or sound?
Okay. So there could be sound that would
Yes.
trigger it. Okay. So
yes.
Yeah, maybe that's what happened. And we just don't know about all that.
And yet. You can control the duration that it films for, but everybody has to make that decision based on how often you want to change your batteries, because if you're taking 5-minute clips every time, it's going to run your battery down fast.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, there you go. That's a little insight from a Ring camera owner.
I got to shut those things off a lot when we're busy around the house, because they go off all the time. So I thought this was interesting. The author said that Dylan says in the PCA she only saw one man, and the author poses, could there be more? She only saw one, and he described it as a team. Was there a team? And I thought, because there are some theories out there about that, especially when they're saying it's a targeted attack.
Yep.
In chapter 10 is about the 4:20 time period. So 3:29, the white sedan is first seen in the neighborhood. 4:04 is the DoorDash driver leaving. 4:20, they said the white sedan, leaves the neighborhood at a high rate of speed. And I do think after one of the hearings a few months ago, they changed that about 5 minutes, made it like 4:25. I don't know. A lot of people think they change things because they're trying to match up, got to have things match up. But if you're just going by.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. So chapter 11 is another press conference.
Right.
And this time it is Roger Lanier. I think that's his first name. And the author gave his background briefly. He was coming from another county. He applied for the same job. He applied for chief, but he didn't get it. Chief Fry got it. And he still came to Moscow to be on their police force, and he became the captain. So he's the captain giving this press conference. He asked for more videos from the community. The author described, he went through all the law enforcement agencies that were working on the case, and there were over 100 between the local law enforcement, the state police, and the FBI. So over 100. He made sure at this press conference that he addressed all the people that they cleared because the internet was going crazy.
Who was your number one suspect?
Hoodie guy.
Hoodie guy.
So they came out, and he didn't say the date. I don't have the date for when this one was, but he made it perfectly clear that they cleared Hoodie guy, the 911 caller. So not saying who it was, but that person is cleared. The ex-boyfriend Jack D was cleared, and the private driver was cleared. He also made sure to say that there are rumors going around and the victims were not tied and gagged. So a lot of people were speculating about that because there's like 4 or 5 hours of that Linda Lane footage, and that camera is on a nearby apartment building facing a parking lot. And there's cars parked there. So you can see reflections in the windows and the mirror, in those cars and in the headlights. And people did all think they see people coming and going. There's even one clip where it does look like Xana and Ethan are going into one of those apartments. I mean, there was a lot. There's a lot. The things he talked about at the press conference was Kaylee having a stalker. And that was big for a long time. And I don't think her parents said that she ever mentioned it to them. I hope I'm not wrong about that. But there was a local vape shop guy that gave an interview. You can find that on the internet. I've watched it. And he said that those girls would go in there all the time. And that one day, Kaylee and Maddie were there with a couple other girls. And they had all walked there. He said they would usually walk there as a group, and that they were talking about how they were walking everywhere together with Kaylee because they didn't want her walking by herself. That was his story. But we know now, just this past, I think it was last May, defense was they were putting out a survey. This was about doing a jury survey. And the prosecution, one of the questions was about the stalker theory. So they were calling people and saying, have you read, seen, or heard anything about one of the victims having a stalker? And the prosecution was like, that's a false statement. So he pretty much cleared that up at that point.
Yeah, I do remember some of that, but I thought that was more directed at Kohberger.
Well, I guess once they had him as a suspect, they were trying to figure out how could he have been, okay, because if he's the perpetrator, why? And so one of the questions is, he's obsessed with them, or he was stalking them.
Yeah,
and so
okay.
There's been a lot of time spent trying to make that connection, and nobody can law enforcement can't come up with a connection, and the cyber sleuths online cannot come up with a connection.
Okay.
And people looked everywhere. Like a couple of the girls worked at a local restaurant in the town, and they thought, and it was a vegan restaurant, and he's vegan. So everybody was like, oh, ding, ding, ding. That could be. No, nothing came from that.
That we know of. There could be some things that, come out in trial, but nothing that the public is aware of at this point.
True. Yeah. Except him saying there's no stalking. He was pretty adamant. So what do you think about this? And I've heard this a couple times. There were 103 pieces of evidence taken from the house with 4 victims. That's like 25 pieces of evidence a piece. You think that's a lot? You think that's, all the things that would be around them, on them, close, going into the house, coming out of the house, what might have been touched? I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know what is a lot. It's a good question.
I guess you can't quantify it, but I don't know. One thing I will bring up, there is a piece of evidence they should have taken. It drives me crazy. There was a ladder leaning against the house. Till the day they tore the house down, the ladder was still there. When they were tearing the house down and we were watching it live, I was like, someone grab the ladder. Someone go get that ladder. Because the Maddie's room was on that 3rd floor with a balcony close by, and there's a ladder right there. Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
They should have taken the ladder.
I'm just thinking, you grab the DoorDash, right? You grab everything that they were wearing, all the bedding,
clothing articles.
Yeah. But it does seem like a lot.
Okay. So this chapter is all about all that information that was from that press conference. And at the end, the author says, but he didn't mention the warrants or knowing about the white car. So they're having this press conference knowing this information. So it's nice to look back on it and now what they knew at that time.
Without spending too much time on it, why do you think they didn't mention the car?
I don't know the date when this press conference was, but I'm sure key evidence like that, they need some time to vet it out themselves
Right.
before they're going. They don't want to give anything away. And if that's the person, if that's the perp, you don't want to spook them and they'll take off. So I get it.
Or destroy the car or, whatever.
Like in Oregon where they found the car that was destroyed. We're going to talk about that in a minute when they talk about it a little bit more. So chapter 12 is all about Fry, and it's kind of going back and just talking about how he spends his days and a lot more about his personality. That, he likes to work in private. He described when he would be in his office working, and if he had the blinds open, like the news people were everywhere all over that town, so they would see him through the window, and so he had to like close his blinds. Described the little bit of turmoil, controversy he had because the local church that can be controversial in that town sent him some baked goods or something, and he
Cookies,
thanked them. And people got mad because he thanked them. So there were some funny, not real funny, but some jabs that were made in this chapter about when the townspeople like brought sandwiches for law enforcement. The author was like, they thanked them. Kind of a zinger back to them thanking the church, So he is describing the town, but at this point, so the crime has happened. It's been a few weeks. The town got inundated with the press. News vans were everywhere. And the people just got so tired of it. They started putting signs up on their doors like, don't ask me, I'm not talking. And signs about like traffic, like don't block this parking spot. Like they were really starting to get annoyed. And then the author made a point to say that it was at this point where, they're waiting for that DNA to come back. And it was coming back from the Idaho State Police Forensic Crime Lab. So that's who they gave it to. And because they're not actually the one, they ended up sending it out to that private lab later. So then the kids are on break and he's talking about how the town is, quiet. After a while, the press leaves. So it's kind of back to normal, but like weird normal.
Yeah. This is still between Thanksgiving and Christmas though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they were speculating the kids aren't going to come back.
Yeah.
Like they're home on break, but they're not going to come back.
Well, it's all back there in 2021, 2022. We were just a half a year out of remote learning and things like that. So it's not like they couldn't pivot, but people don't spend money if they're not at home. People don't spend money if they're at home. They want them at the campus. So they're trying to get, people back to the campus.
In the businesses.
Yep.
Yes, for sure. So then he's talking about the DNA. Sir was saying that on pins and needles because they're waiting. The DNA is going to be coming and, could it have been contaminated, with multiple sources and that they were very relieved that they were able to find a single trace source of male DNA off the sheath.
Right.
And so then they ran it through CODIS. So then they're excited about that. Like, we're going to run it through CODIS. And I thought this was interesting. So, CODIS has all of anybody who's been arrested, right? Something like that.
Something like
that.
Yeah, that's.
But I thought it was interesting. So makes sense after I heard him. But you think of every crime that's happened in the country, all the agencies that are uploading a DNA sample to look for a match, those are also all in there. So you could not know who a person, this has happened before, I believe. I can't remember what crime it was. You could upload a crime scene DNA and have it match another crime. So this person did the same two crimes, but we don't know who they are.
Right.
In the Golden State Killer case, I'm not sure. Something like that. Some cases like that. Yeah. They did go on to say that so CODIS was not a hit. So then that's when they start using the genealogy sites. And a lot of court hearings on this recently, and I mean, it does look, and I think they pretty much came out and said the FBI used sites that they weren't supposed to use to get the match that they got. It was also, people are floored to find out that when Othram, so a representative from Othram testified, once they got the DNA and they were working on it and they were using the genealogy, they had traced it to 4 brothers and reached out. They were like low number samples, so they wanted something better. So they had the name. They had the name of the family. They wouldn't say the name of the family. It's redacted in the court transcripts. But they reached out to one of the brothers, and a couple times the conversations must not have went well, because he said, "Don't call me again." And so after that, and this is all from court transcripts. I don't have that all printed out to have in front of me, but I'll go dig if we need the evidence. That once that happened, the FBI told them, stop working and send us the sample. And so then the FBI took it. And then that's where, when we had that whole conversation on whatever episode we did about it doubling in size.
Mm-hmm.
So now the FBI has it. And I guess I was under the impression when we talked about it last time that it doubled at Othram, and then they gave it to the FBI. But now the understanding is, Othram just did that work with it. We're told to stop, give it to the FBI, and then they're the ones that made the match.
Sounds good. I'm glad someone made a match.
Sounds suspicious. So, and that can be, we'll have to look up exactly what those transcripts say about it, because it'll be good for you and I to really look at it and see if we can, you make sense of it in your way, I'll make sense of it in my way, and see what we come to when we're reading it from the transcript.
Well, let's unpack it a little bit, I guess, just on, the level that we have it. So the FBI did investigative genealogy. No matter how they got there, right? They landed on a name. Why wasn't that name that they landed on in Maine and, was a quadriplegic?
Why was their name different than Othram's name?
Doesn't matter.
It does matter. It's the same DNA. And Kohberger's name, the guy testified at court, Kohberger's name was not the name that was on that tree.
So we're talking about 2 different things.
It's the same DNA.
The DNA, so the DNA is not going to land in the investigative genealogy immediately on Brian Kohberger.
I know.
You understand that, right?
Yeah.
So whoever does the tree could erroneously be like, oh, hey, I'm looking over here, and land up with 4 brothers over here. But, someone of, FBI's expertise, or CC Moore, who I'm just making up names, may be like, look, this is an art. This isn't you just spit out a number and you get to this. You have to look at, death certificates and adoption papers. And
well, that's after you get your initial hit, though. And what I'm thinking is the FBI should have uploaded it the same way that Othram did. And you're going to get those numbers, those centimorgans they talk about. Yeah. You're going to get those numbers.
Yeah.
And if Othram uploaded it into, now I know they use different sites.
Yeah.
I don't know, that this is where this big long conversation comes, because I can't really argue against the FBI, because the FBI won't say what they did. And that's another issue with everything in this case. Like, I don't want to fight against it. I just want to know that how did you get something different than this other lab? Explain it. And if you're not explaining it, then it looks like you're hiding something. Like, otherwise, why not just say?
Okay. We've had that conversation.
I'll say that forever.
a lot. I'm asking you something different.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, no matter how they got there, why didn't it land on somebody that was in Maine that was a quadriplegic? How did it land on somebody within the area, right? Because this is a international database with people from all over the world that put their names and their spit or DNA into this system. How did it land? How did the Plinko chip land right on somebody who lives 9 miles away, left his apartment at a certain period of time? Like, how?
It's a good question.
So either you're saying, I want to see the work that they did with the genetic genealogy, or, hey, you don't have any work. You guys are just pegging Brian Kohberger, and he's 100% innocent. And just tell us now that you just plucked him out of obscurity and said, I want this guy to go down for 4 gruesome murders. I mean,
It looks hidden. It looks shady, because if they wanted his DNA, they could have gotten his DNA when he was in Washington State. They didn't. Supposedly, they used his dad's DNA for something, and I don't even know how that fits into this whole thing. Well, I guess once they swabbed his the buccal swab of Brian himself.
all right. So I want to get back to the book, but the DNA is going to be
Because
a big
that's
thing
what I'm
here.
saying. They took his DNA. I'm sorry, but I just thought of what I wanted to say. They took his DNA once they matched the dad's to the sheath, that whole thing. Then now they have his DNA. So
Yeah,
I don't know what they did with it.
they matched it to the murder weapon sheath. But to get to Brian Kohberger, they landed on what they thought was the father of the person who committed the crime. That's where they landed. So when they got actual DNA to compare it against, it was only the father, because the son never contributed any DNA to the garbage in Pennsylvania. So when they did the DNA of the garbage, the murderer, that's the father of the murderer. Now we need an arrest warrant to arrest the son, because now we need that exact match.
I wonder who did that testing. I wonder which agency did that.
Good question.
Yeah, I don't know. So there's a lot to talk about with the DNA, and I'm not as versed. It's very complicated, and I need things in writing on paper to argue it really well. I'll have to prepare. We'll prepare for a big talk like that. Okay, so what was that? Chapter
12. So we're on 13 and 14, where they talk 13 and 14, they talk about Kaylee and Maddie kind of growing up, that whole thing.
Yeah, so the author's kind of taking us back. He's setting up the scene for when they're at the university.
Yeah.
So backtracking kind of back in time, how they grew up together. They went to a private school. He's kind of building their character traits, like they're hard workers because they're at this conservative school that was like, hard rules and things like that, which made them studious students, to get them through college. Story about how they petitioned both their parents to go to public school. That Kaylee was a true crime buff. Favorite that she watched, a favorite show that she watched. Right. I thought it was sweet that her dad reached out to that person. Really liked you. Now, can you help? And that social media person, Chronicles of Olivia, she actually got to interview the family. Right. So she did her own interview. That was really interesting to hear. The family was describing like how that day was, how they found out, and the time. There were some nuggets that came out of that. With chapter 15, where the girls, Maddie and Kaylee, are now at the university. They're rushing to be in a sorority. They go into 2 different sororities. We talked about that before because I think Kaylee was a legacy. So, and Maddie didn't get into that one. But they both got into party sororities, and both of their sororities were on probation.
Yeah.
Because they had broken their risk management rules.
And just to give a little context of the book, I guess, is so he's already gone through the crime, right? So now he's kind of going back pre-crime and trying to, set up the characters a little bit more. At the very beginning of the book, he was like, this is just a good person and this is a good person. And this person had, some life struggles. But now they're really getting into depth of the, like you said, the character and the personality and what they were doing up to the day that this had happened. So just trying to set the scene a little bit. So yes, they rushed different sororities. Weird because they were so tight. Why would they be in different ones, these two,
Yeah. And because Kaylee got into one, because I think her sister or mom had been in there. So
legacy.
You're like, yeah. And then Maddie she didn't get into that one. So
gotcha.
That's what happened. Leading up to them moving into the house together. I think they moved in August. Does that sound right to you? I know it was in the summertime, I believe. So they move into the house, and now he's talking about the neighbors and the area around it. So there's a neighbor that lives behind and elevated. The house is up elevated above them. And this neighbor is Matthew Moy, and he got to know Kaylee through their dogs. So her dog would get loose and run over to where his was. And sometimes they would see each other walking their dogs. And I know he has a sister because the author was talking about the roommates and his sister lived in that house, and a person that a lot of people on social media were checking out.
Not the sister, but Matt.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
If a name comes up, you're getting thoroughly vetted.
All right. Fair enough.
So if you could be connected, if you could be, whatever. It was interesting that he described, 2 things were interesting about him. So he did admit that he made one of the noise complaint calls on the house, which I thought was ironic because he said, he'd always hear their parties. And remember when we watched the Banfield, the boys that got stopped in the Banfield the night of the crime, they said they were coming from a party. And I think they said some guy named Matt. Could be wrong about that. But, he said he called because, he had to go to bed early one night or whatever. So, but there were a lot of noise complaint calls.
Just another name, but not a big player in what we're dealing with here.
Not anything that's in court transcripts or anything. But the other interesting thing was that, and I've heard this said by a lot of people that were interviewed, their first response was that they thought that the deaths would have been like an overdose from fentanyl or something like that. Like that would be the author said that in the book, that this neighbor, that was like their first assumption. Or deaths in a house of these college kids, that would be the reason, not someone broke in and
did that
to them. The author made sure to say that he graduated and he's out of there now, though. Which the author does do a good job connecting. He's talking about to a completely different topic by finding like a nugget of a connection, because he's leaving talking about Matt going off to work, and then he goes right back to Kaylee and how she was going to go for a IT job, a Range Rover, and she had moved out of the house October, I believe, and was only coming back that day of the crime because she had bought this new car and wanted to show it off to her friends. And I wanted to talk to you about that.
So before we do, let's clarify. So there are 5 roommates currently living in the home.
Yes.
There's a 6th one that was on the lease but wasn't living there.
Yeah, I don't think she lived there very long.
And of the 5, actually one of them, which is Kaylee, had moved out. So now there are really only 4 actual lease signed tenants
Yes.
living in that house.
Yes.
Okay. Ethan was a guest.
Yes.
So really there were 4 living there at the time. Kaylee actually came back to show off
Just for that weekend.
Ugh. Okay.
Yeah.
Painful.
Mm-hmm. But my question to you was, I'm just thinking, like, we both went to college. You're graduating in December. I
Mhm.
was a December graduate. I stayed in my apartment. You're off campus by then.
Mhm.
You're ready to start your life. I stayed in my apartment after I graduated because you're trying to figure out, okay, what's my next move? What am I going to do?
Right.
She left before she was going to graduate. And I mean, I don't think it's crucial to know the answer to that. It's interesting. I think it's a different decision, trying to save money.
Well, she still probably had to pay.
Well, that's been talked about online too, because we talked about seeing Venmo transactions episode. You had to explain that to me because I don't use those apps a lot. There were a lot of messages that people have been able to see making requests for bill payment, rent, things like that. And it didn't look like it was getting paid. So that could be a source of.
Well, I think everybody handles their transition a little bit different. I was, you said you stayed on campus until you graduated, even though you had finished school, right?
No, not on campus.
Well, at your apartment near the university.
Yeah.
So when graduation
stayed at school.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was hybrid my last semester. I think I only had to take 1, maybe 2 classes. And so I was in the workforce and still finishing kind of college at that time, so everybody does it a little bit differently.
True.
Graduate probably is a thing too. There's a lot of kids that do senior year internships. I don't know if she was fishing for, I think she had recently got a job. She was going to have a job.
Yes, in Texas. She was moving away.
So this was kind of maybe a transition for her to be like, let me backpack Idaho before I, whatever.
Then what has been said is that, she moved out of the house. She was back at home, I believe, had plans to backpack in Europe in January after graduation.
That was my guess.
And then go start her new job.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But I'm still thinking, speculation, but she was a true crime person, mysteries, to the point where the author in that chapter about her and Maddie said that she had thought she saw a missing person one time and actually called the police like, hey, I see this person. A reason to move out would be, I'm scared of something, or I'm not comfortable being here. And maybe it's just a comfortableness. I'm not comfortable being here anymore.
Or maybe, hey, I'm grown up, these parties
it
are
could
done,
be as simple as that. It could be as simple as that.
But duly noted, I guess I like to say bendito.
Yeah.
The bendito part of this, which means, literal translation is blessing, but we use it in our family like, poor thing, thing. Is she left and came back just on this weekend. And if this would have happened the weekend before or after, she might still be with her family. So,
and the author ended with describing her new car sitting there 3 weeks later after the crime, and that how it was just waiting there because it was supposed to be driving her off to start her life. And that was a very touching ending to that.
Bendito.
To that chapter. Yes.
Bendito.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a kind of somber way to end it. But again, this book is cut and dry with some basic facts that happen at the very beginning. Good to look back and to see what things were happening at the time and some of the stuff we know today. Some of these things made connections and, what things that we thought were absolutely straight line to the answer to the solving this. But it's interesting. It's an interesting read. Again, it's Leapt by J. Reuben Appelman. Probably came out a couple years ago. Not a bad pickup if you wanted to out. I'm sure there's going to be tons of books after this, so this is a good outline as to what everything happened.
Yes, the part 1 and 2 we did. I inserted pictures or videos of things that lined up to it. I don't know if there's anything in these chapters that I will add to it, but I do like doing that. I really like taking this resource that we can use to go through the original timeline and then compare the facts we know now.
Right.
So
only thing I could think of on here is maybe the second press conference with Lanier, but
yes, that would be a good one.
But other than that, not really.
Yep. Well, we hope you'll join us back for the next part.
Part
we
4.
are not finished yet. We will be back with part 4. So we will see you then. And please hit the like button if you enjoyed this, and subscribe if you haven't. Share it out with friends. We appreciate it.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.